Quiet on the set.
Camera speed.
Sound production, take one.
Action!
Welcome to From Beneath the Hollywood Sign. If you love old movies, Hollywood history, or the golden age of filmmaking, you've come to the right place. This is the podcast that talks about amazing stories of Tinseltown from another era. Hear fascinating conversations with writer-producer Steve Cubine, who quite literally lives just beneath the Hollywood sign, and actress-writer Nan McNamara. Now your hosts, Steve and Nan.
So, welcome to 2025, Nan.
I can't believe it. Happy New Year, Steve.
Happy New Year to you. Another year of From Beneath the Hollywood Sign.
Yes, and Happy New Year to all of our listeners who we are so grateful for.
I know. Thank you guys for just all your love, all of your support. You've gotten us to where we are, and we really appreciate it.
Yes.
And we've got some really fun shows coming up for you, so thanks for tuning in, and I hope you continue to do so.
And maybe a live show even later in the year when we celebrate our 100th episode.
Wow.
I know. Maybe we'll cut that out, but I don't know.
We'll see. So today's episode, as we do the first of every month,
right,
we do a Star of the Month.
Yes.
And when I was a kid, I remember watching the very funny and very heartwarming film Christmas in July, 1940. I saw it on TV as a rerun. In my opinion, it's one of Preston Sturges's most underrated films of all time.
And I think we talked about it on the 1940s Favorite Films episode.
We did, because I love the movie so much. It's about this ambitious clerk named Jimmy McDonald, played beautifully by Dick Powell, who's tricked by his coworkers, who are hilariously named Tom, Dick, and Harry, I might add, into thinking he's won this $25,000 grand prize in a slogan writing contest for a coffee company. Well, he begins to spend his believed earnings early, and everyone's very happy to give him credit. So he starts just spending like crazy. He wants to fulfill his dreams and bring some joy and happiness to all of those around him and all of those he loves, which is really lovely. Well, you can imagine the comic complications that arise when he discovers he didn't win.
Right.
Well, playing his pretty, steadfast girlfriend Betty Casey was the charming and very talented Ellen Drew. And Ellen, in this film, exudes this dewy, fresh-faced optimism and faithfulness that could only be defined as the ultimate girl next door. She really was. I mean, she was the kind of movie girlfriend that would darn your socks and then bake you a pie and then go to church with your mother. I mean, she was just apple pie, all-American, wonderful. And I thought she was exquisite. Well, about a month after watching Christmas in July, I tuned into another film called Johnny O'Clock from 1947.
Okay.
And these two films could not have been more different. The only difference was that Johnny O'Clock, which was directed by Robert Rossen, a dark story about corruption within a casino with murder and crooked cops and mob bosses littering the landscape. The only thing that these two had in common were the stars, Dick Powell and Ellen Drew. Only now, Powell is playing this tough, jaded casino worker, and Drew is quite the femme fatale as the brutal casino owner's wife, who still carries a torch for Powell's character. So it made me think, a lot's happened to Jimmy and Betty from Christmas in July in 7 years. What happened?
Right, what happened?
But it's probably one of the first times that I was ever cognitively aware that actors could have range and versatility.
Yes.
And I thought Powell and Drew showed such magnificent range and versatility in these two performances that it really stuck with me. I was particularly struck by Drew's transformation from this warm and lovely girl next door to this hardened alcoholic casino moll. It was a stunning juxtaposition, I thought.
Yeah.
And so I began watching Drew, paying a lot of attention to her over the years, and I'm continually surprised and impressed what a chameleon she was. She really gets lost in a role, and she played a wide range of characters, much like her more well-known contemporaries Ingrid Bergman, Eleanor Parker, and Claire Trevor. So this month, we celebrate Ellen Drew, our Star of the Month.
Yes. Drew began life as Esther Loretta Ray in Kansas City, Missouri on November 23rd, 1914.
Oh, girl, change that name.
I know, right? Her father was a barber and her mother was a homemaker. They divorced when Drew was about 15 years old. The financial strain on the family forced Drew to work some odd jobs to help support her mother and younger brother. So she was an elevator operator and an accountant's assistant at Marshall Field's department store. She later got a job as a sales girl at the Grant Five and Dime store in Englewood, Illinois, where her family had moved. moved. She impressed her boss with her beauty, her poise, and her fresh-faced appeal. And so he encouraged her to enter a beauty pageant, which she won. Lots of our stars that we've talked about in the past have entered the business that
Which
way.
I think that would be a great episode.
You know what,
Actresses
that
who
would
started
be.
out as beauty contestants or beauty contest winners.
Her friends and family urged her to try her luck in Hollywood because she had won the contest. So when some friends decided to vacation in California, she went along for the ride to see if she might be able to break into movies like her idol, Margaret Sullivan.
Well, you know, when she got to Los Angeles, she was industrious, she was hardworking, and she landed a job at C.C. Brown's confectionery store on Hollywood Boulevard. She made $11.50 a week.
Well, she had a resume. She had been in all those different jobs back in Illinois.
I know. She knew how to go and get gainful employment.
Yes.
Well, this proved to be very fortuitous for this budding actress because while she was scooping up that ice cream at that store, she met handsome young makeup artist and sometimes actor Fred Wallace, and they fell in love.
Oh.
Well, another person she met at work was the wonderful character actor William Demarest, who most people of my generation know as Uncle Charlie on TV's My Three Sons, which ran from 1960 to 1972.
I didn't realize it was 12 years that show ran.
That show ran forever.
It did.
Well, Demarest, who was moonlighting as an actor's agent for the Edward Small agency, saw something very special in Ellen Drew, and he asked if she wanted his help in securing a movie contract.
Oh.
I know. Well,
Lovely.
Drew wasn't so convinced that he was legitimate.
Oh, really?
She'd been warned about those strange men in Hollywood who
Yeah,
offer you movie contracts. So she turned him down.
Okay.
Well, he told her, if you ever change your mind, I'll be there for you. Well, cut to 1935, Drew and Wallace get married, and by early 1936, they welcome their son David, who they nicknamed Skipper. And Drew went back to the ice cream parlor, but she was miserable. Not only did she miss being with her son during the day, but her dreams of Hollywood stardom seemed to be slipping further and further away. So on a whim, she calls up Uncle Charlie. She calls William Demarest and she says, is the offer still good? And he said, of course it is. So he managed to get her a screen test at Paramount Pictures. Paramount saw great potential in this beautiful brunette. They signed her for a 7-year contract at $50 a week.
Wow.
In 1936.
It's a lot better than $11.50.
A lot better. A la Lana Turner, she went from ice cream scooper to Paramount Pictures star.
Right,
So
right.
that's just how things worked back then.
Paramount quickly changes her name, but not to Ellen Drew.
No.
They changed it to Terry Ray as she was groomed for stardom.
Sounds like a guy.
I know, it doesn't, Terry.
No.
No, I mean, Teresa Ray maybe?
Maybe.
But, yeah. She appears in bit parts playing secretaries and telephone operators and usherettes and nurses in films like Hollywood Boulevard, 1936, starring Marsha Hunt. And Robert Cummins. The Big Broadcast of 1937, which was filmed in 1936, with Jack Benny, George Burns, and Gracie Allen, and Make Way for Tomorrow, 1937, with Victor Moore and Beulah Bondi.
Our Beulah.
And it was also around that time that she was brought in to screen test for the role of Scarlett O'Hara in Gone with the Wind, 1939. So of the hundreds of women considered for the coveted role of Scarlett, only 31 were given official screen tests. And Drew was one of them.
Yeah, isn't that interesting?
Yeah.
So after small bits in more than 24 movies, Paramount finally gave her a role that she could sink her teeth into. But first, they changed her brunette hair to auburn, and they changed her name again, briefly to Erin Drew, and they finally settled on Ellen Drew.
Okay.
Finally got it right.
Okay, good, yes.
So she was cast as the female lead opposite Bing Crosby and Fred MacMurray in the musical comedy Sing You Sinners in 1938, which was directed by Wesley Ruggles. The film, which also starred Donald O'Connor and Elizabeth Patterson, was a critical and commercial hit and introduced the song I've Got a Pocket Full of Dreams, which became a standard for Bing Crosby. Drew received great notices, and many people noted how natural she was as an actress.
Her next picture pretty much seals the deal to her stardom. If I Were King, 1938, a historical biography of poet Francois Villon, was a critical darling that received 4 Oscar nominations. Drew was 4th billed behind Ronald Colman, Basil Rathbone, and Francis D. But she gives a stunning performance as Villon's love interest.
Oh, she really does.
And not only did she hold her own with all those folks I just mentioned, but her final scene in the film is absolutely heartbreaking. Critics took notice of her powerful performance. It pretty much propels her to stardom at Paramount, complete with a raise to $1,000 a week.
Wow.
And the studio mounted a huge publicity campaign for their new star, calling her Dear Lord. The Candy Store Cinderella. How the heck does that... Is that because she works at a candy store?
She did. C.C. Brown's confectionery store.
The Candy Store Cinderella.
She was the Candy Store Cinderella.
All right. I don't know about that.
I love those names they came up with.
At least it wasn't too sexualized.
I know. It wasn't like the Wowza Girl.
Yeah.
Her climb up the ladder at Paramount created undue stress at home. They wanted to capitalize on Ellen Drew's innocent girl next door image, so they forbid her from mentioning the little annoying fact that she was married and had a child.
Oh, that's terrible.
I know, so she kind of had to hide her husband and son from the public, which must have been so stressful for her.
It must have been.
And it was sure no fun walk in the park for her husband, I'm sure.
Right.
That wasn't so good, but they wanted the proper image for their new ingenue, and that's the way they were going to go. Well, in 1940, Drew was cast in, we just mentioned, the Preston Sturges comedy Christmas in July. It was another feather in her cap, and it really helped establish her further as a popular film actress. However, her career may have been thriving, but life at home was just continuing to fall apart.
But before we get into that and more of her career, I think it's time for this week's Hollywood Pop Quiz.
Yes, and of course the pop quiz is going to be about our girl, Ellen Drew. In 1954, she starred as the wife and mother in the pilot for what would go on to become a hugely successful family comedy that would run for 6 seasons. However, she opted not to do the series. Big mistake. What was the TV series?
Oh, good question. All right, we'll be back with the answer and more about the fabulous Ellen Drew after this.
Steve and Ann will be right back, but first another stop on the Hollywood tour. It's safe to say that one of the most popular films in Hollywood's golden era would be 1939's The Wizard of Oz, and it produced one of America's favorite songs of all time, Over the Rainbow. But it almost didn't happen. Here's the backstory. Just before the film was released, MGM executives had an advanced screening for a test audience. They were still tinkering with the film. Well, a few of those studio executives felt the film was a bit too long, and they thought Judy Garland singing Over the Rainbow actually slowed down the film. So believe it or not, they took out that entire scene. But fortunately for us, there was an associate producer named Arthur Freed, and he reportedly stepped in and confronted studio head Louis B. Mayer. Freed said, quote, "The song stays or I go." Well, Mayer thought for a moment and then ordered the executives, let the boys have the damn song, put it back in the picture. It can't hurt. And all these decades later, the film and the song by composer Harold Arlen and lyricist Yip Harburg are American cultural touchstones. In fact, in 2001, Over the Rainbow was voted the greatest song of the 20th century in a joint survey by the National Endowment of the Arts and the Recording Industry Association of America. And now back to Steve and Ann from Beneath the Hollywood Sign.
Welcome back, everybody, with our star of the month, Ellen Drew. But before we get further into Ellen Drew's life and career, I wanted to give a big shout out to our listener of the week. And this week, it is Sarah Edelman. And Sarah wrote me a really great email, and she is a publicist, and she wants to write a book about Patricia Douglas. I have been fascinated by the Patricia Douglas story for years. I was so excited to hear Sarah write about this. And for people who may not know, Douglas was this aspiring actress who was one of the very first people to come forward after experiencing sexual assault at an exhibitors convention for MGM Studios, and she sued the studio as one of the very first people to ever take on a major studio.
Good on her.
Well, in retaliation, though, MGM conducted this brutal smear campaign against her. So it's a fascinating story, and I hope you write this book, Sarah, so keep us posted.
And thanks for listening, Sarah.
Thanks, Sarah.
So when we left off with Ellen Drew, her career was thriving, but her personal life, not so much.
Not so much.
She and Wallace divorced the same year that Christmas in July was filmed. Their divorce was amicable by Hollywood standards, and they peacefully co-parented Skipper. And then Paramount kept Drew pretty busy for the next couple of years. She was able to show off her versatility by casting her in a variety of roles, many different genres of films. She was in the horse racing drama The Ladies from Kentucky, 1939, opposite George Raft. The Western Geronimo, 1939, with Preston Foster. The crime comedy, The Gracie Allen Murder Case, 1939, with, guess who? Gracie Allen.
Gracie Allen.
The sophisticated comedy French Without Tears, 1940, opposite Ray Milland. And Buck Benny Rides Again, 1940, another Western adventure film with Jack Benny, where she and actresses Virginia Dale and Lillian Cornell introduced the song Say It, which later became a standard for the Glenn Miller Orchestra.
Nice. In January of 1941, while she was vacationing in Palm Springs, Drew met Cy Bartlett. He was a Russian-born screenwriter who would come to be known later as the writer of Road to Zanzibar, 1941, which starred Bob Hope, Bing Crosby, and Dorothy Lamour, 13 Madeleine Rue, 1947, with James Cagney, and 12 O'Clock High, 1949, with Gregory Peck. In fact, Bartlett was actually the writer on one of Ellen Drew's films, The Ladies from Kentucky. He had previously been married to actress Alice White, and he pursued Ellen Drew ferociously. He wanted him some Ellen Drew bad. So the couple, soon they were in love, they're engaged, and they got married on August the 16th, 1941 in Lake Tahoe, California.
Okay. She would then go on to be a great scream queen in several early horror films like The Mad Doctor, 1941, starring again Basil Rathbone, The Monster and the Girl, 1941, with Paul Lucas and Philip Terry, and Isle of the Dead, 1945, starring Boris Karloff. So she's really working with some great people. She also embraced her knack for comedy by playing the conniving ex-wife of Melvin Douglas, who plots to steal him back from Ruth Hussey in Our Wife, 1941.
Great movie, by the way. I love that movie.
I don't think I've ever seen that
so
movie.
So fun, so funny.
And then she was really solid in the film noir The Night of January 16th, 1941 with Robert Preston. She also, boy, what a prolific year. Reaching for the Sun, 1941, playing the city waitress who marries a rural backwoodsman, played by Joel McCrea.
Well, soon after she got married to Cy Bartlett, Bartlett was very noted in his absolute opposition of communism. Mm-hmm. He hated it with a passion, so he joined the military as the U.S. prepared to enter World War II. He was assigned to a post in Washington, D.C., and Drew joined him, taking a brief leave from Hollywood. However, when the war began, Drew was summoned back to Hollywood to resume her career because those troops would need morale-boosting films, of course.
Absolutely.
Well, she soon appeared in the comedy drama The Remarkable Andrew, 1942, where she plays a woman perplexed with her fiance, played by William Holden's knack for talking to the ghost of Andrew Jackson.
Oh, how funny.
Played by Brian Donlevy. It's actually a really funny movie. I love this movie.
I love it.
She's also in My Favorite Spy from 1942, where she plays a bride whose groom, played by Kay Kaiser, is sent off on a secret spy mission with another woman, played by Jane Wyman. And in Night Plane to Chungking, 1942, she portrayed a nurse, and she's reteamed with Robert Preston. During this time, her husband was promoted to the rank of major and sent to England, and Drew became very active in the war effort and less focused on her career. She sold war bonds, she performed radio spots to boost morale, and she appeared at the Hollywood Canteen, which was, of course, for those who don't know, a special club which offered food, dancing, and entertainment for enlisted men and women during the war.
So Drew's standing at Paramount Pictures seemed to be shifting. She wasn't getting offered the top-notch films that she was used to. When the studio assigned her to a subpar, lightweight musical where she would play second banana to Ann Miller, she actually refused the role, and for the first time in her career was put on suspension without pay. So she had a 7-month suspension.
Wow.
Now that allowed her to go to England to see her husband, Bartlett, whom she had hardly spent any time with since their wedding, and she also was able to entertain the troops. After she returned from this trip, she was surprised to see how indifferent Paramount had become to her career. They were focused on building the careers of their latest discoveries like Veronica Lake, Betty Hutton, and Dorothy Lamour, and Ellen Drew pretty much saw the writing on the wall.
Yeah, but she decided to take matters into her own hands, which I really respect her for this. She contacted the American Office of War Information and the theatrical division of the British Ministry of Information, and she requested permission for another 10-week visit to England where she could help with the war efforts and hopefully spend time with her husband. Well, this made Paramount Pictures furious that she had made this request.
Oh.
And so they let her contract quietly expire. But as an additional punishment, her final film under Paramount's contract, they forced her to appear in a small, uncredited role in this very lame, fluffy film called And the Angels Sing, 1944, that starred their new darlings, Betty Hutton and Dorothy Lamour.
So, without the power and protection of a major studio behind her, and we've heard this story before, right, with other
Yes.
celebrities that have had this happen, Drew is adrift in the murky waters of working as a freelance actress after all those years at Paramount. So she goes to Universal. She appears in the ill-received war drama Strange Confession, 1944, starring Jean Gabon. At Republic Pictures, she starred opposite Richard Arlen in the B-grade comedy That's My Baby, 1944. And then, unfortunately, kind of sinking even lower, she appears in Dark Mountain, 1944 for Pine Thomas Productions, which is this very low-budget film company known as part of Hollywood's Poverty Row Studios. But she did also manage to appear in a couple of interesting films. She's in RKO's China Sky, 1945, as Randolph Scott's wife. But she never really gets the momentum and prestige of her years at Paramount.
No, she really didn't. But in 1946, she was under contract at Columbia Pictures, where she made a very strong impression in the aforementioned Johnny O'Clock, which I talked about earlier, 1947, where she played that smoldering, scorned ex-lover of Dick Powell who tries to make him pay for betraying her. Well, in fact, Drew campaigned hard for this role after being slipped a copy of the script. She pleaded with the director, Robert Rossen, to allow her to test for the femme fatale part. Well, he was very skeptical because he thought of her as too ladylike to play such an impassioned, devious woman. He finally agreed to let her test, and she was magnificent and won the part, giving one of the finest performances in her career.
Let's give a listen to one of her scenes.
Perfect.
You did come up to see me, didn't you, Johnny?
Sure. Couldn't stay away from you. You know why he left us here alone, don't you?
You afraid of him?
You heard him tell about how many years we've been together, what we've been through.
Johnny, baby, he'd be the first one to stick a knife in your back.
There already. I can feel the blood sticking to my shirt. Yeah, there's something going on I don't know about. What I don't know, I don't like. You can help me.
Me? How?
Find out what Bladen and him talked about last night. Find out where Bladen is.
And if I do?
I'll owe you a favor.
14 carat. You're a 14 carat heel. All you ever think about is yourself.
You and me both.
Get out.
I was never here.
All right, so I flew off the handle.
Look, we don't have to kid each other.
I never kidded you, Johnny.
No, I was money from home for you till you met
I
Marquettas.
told you the way it was.
You didn't have to tell me. With that fine, conniving mind, you decided to fall in love.
What'd you expect me to do?
Just what you did. Marry Marquettas for what you could get out of it.
It wasn't enough.
Rings on your fingers, bells on your toes. That's what you wanted, and that's what you got.
It isn't enough.
It was your deal. You made it, and you'll stick to it.
Things change, Johnny.
Oh, stop playing us off against each other, Nell. It won't work.
What are you going to do about it? Oh, you won't tell him, Johnny. I know you. You'll play it safe like you always do.
That's right, Nell. I'll play it safe. And that's why you got the watch back.
What'd you say I got back?
The watch.
I never got it back.
Well, I gave it to Harriet, the kid in the check room.
I never got the watch back, Johnny.
Oh, great clip from Johnny O'Clock, of course, 1947.
Unfortunately, most of her other roles at Columbia were kind of run-of-the-mill love interest types, such as The Swordsman in 1948, where she was basically window dressing for Larry Parks to fight for, and in the Western The Man from Colorado, 1949, where she had another thankless role of the love interest. But if you have to play the thankless love interest, you might as well do it opposite Glenn Ford and William Holden.
Indeed.
I would do that.
Well, as her career began to decline, so did her marriage to Cy Bartlett. After separating and reconciling many, many times over the years, their volatile relationship hit an embarrassing low point when Bartlett chased Drew out of their Beverly Hills mansion and into the streets after one of their notorious fights.
Oh, ouch. That is humiliating.
Yeah, the neighbors are watching.
Yeah.
Well, they finally divorced in 1949. 1949.
Okay.
She did have a bright spot in her waning career as she closed out the 1940s. She was very compelling in the moody film noir The Crooked Way, 1949, where she plays a dishy B-girl who might just hold the secret to John Payne's amnesia. And she and Payne had really great chemistry in this one.
Now, the 50s brought a mixed bag of roles to Drew. She was really lovely as Joel McCrea's wife in Stars in My Crown, 1950, but she wasn't really given much to do.
But really good movie. I really recommend that one.
She was also the woman whom Broderick Crawford and John Ireland fight over in another B-grade adventure drama, Cargo to Cape Town, 1950, and she was pretty much wasted in a couple of westerns, The Great Missouri Raid, 1950, and Man in the Saddle, 1951.
When her film career was no longer exciting, her love life perked up.
Good.
And she met and married William T. Walker. He was a former Detroit advertising executive whose family made a fortune in the auto industry. They married at Walker's Ranch in Indio, California, and after a 2-month European honeymoon, they moved to Beverly Hills.
Do you think they moved to the same neighborhood where she lived?
I don't
with
think
Bartlett?
so. You can't go back there.
No.
Well, her new husband really encouraged Drew to give up acting and just travel the world with him. Well, they did travel quite a bit, and she got tired of it. She wanted to go back to Hollywood to see if she could resurrect her failing career. So back to Hollywood she goes, and she concentrates this time on television, which allowed her to have a shorter production schedule and to stay in California with her new husband and her son. She appeared in Lux Video Theater, the Ford Television Theater, The Millionaire, and Perry Mason. Her final television appearance was on The Barbara Stanwyck Show in 1961. She officially retired from motion pictures and television at the age of 50.
And she eventually divorced Walker in 1967 and married for a 4th time to James Edward Herbert in 1971, but this marriage also ended after 5 years. In 2000, she moved to a retirement villa in Palm Desert, California, to be closer to her son, Skipper. She passed away on December 3rd, 2003, from a liver ailment at age 89.
And I always thought that Ellen Drew was so underappreciated. She was beautiful. She had great allure. I mean, she brightened up so many mediocre movies, in my opinion.
Yeah.
And what I found the most appealing about her was her versatility, which I talked about at the top of this podcast. As an actress, she really, really was versatile, and she had range, and she seemingly chose parts that challenged her, which I really appreciated. Mm-hmm. She had that wholesomeness about her, but there was also this subtle sexuality that just bubbled under the surface with her. I think her keen versatility may have kept her from developing a more distinctly defined screen persona, the way that others did, like Barbara Stanwyck and Bette Davis and Ida Lupino. They all had very distinct screen personas where I think she was so versatile you didn't really know what she was.
I feel like that's the difference in many ways between the actors and actresses from the golden age, from 30s, 40s, 50s, yes, to what we look at now. When you look at actors today, you want to see range.
Yes.
You want to see them. Oh, they can, think of Meryl Streep.
You don't want to see them do the same role.
Right.
Whereas in the old days, we couldn't wait to see Katharine Hepburn do Katharine Hepburn.
Right.
Yeah.
Or any number of them, people, yeah. Well, I'm so happy that we get to highlight someone that people might not know a lot about.
I know, me too.
And just as a little preview of what's coming up in the rest of January for our podcast, we're going to be focusing on the film noir genre.
Yeah, look out, folks. It's going to be Film Noir January.
It's going to be dark, people, real dark.
There's going to be smoking guns and film fatales.
I think it's time for this week's Hollywood Pop Quiz.
All right, and the question was that in 1954, Ellen Drew starred as the wife and mother of a pilot of a show that ended up being insanely popular, and she decided not to do the series. What was the TV series?
What was it?
Well, May 27th, 1954, she and Robert Young did an episode of the Ford Television Theater. The segment was called Keep It in the Family.
Is it Father Knows Best?
This ended up being the pilot for Father Knows Best.
Oh, boy.
And she opted not to do it.
Oh, and it would have been perfect because she wanted to stay in California with her family. Oh,
yeah,
well.
So, her loss was Jane Wyatt's gain.
Roads not taken,
yep.
Right? Well, we so appreciate you listening and spending this time with us. We would love it if you would give us a 5-star review wherever you listen to your podcasts, and also follow us on social media. Our handle is @FromBeneathTheHollywoodSign. You can find us on Instagram, Facebook, and you can watch the podcast with photographs. Thank you, John Price Ritchie. on YouTube.
And I would love to know, what's your favorite Ellen Drew movie? You can email us at info@FromBeneathTheHollywoodSign.com.
That's this week's View.
From Beneath the Hollywood Sign.
You've been listening to From Beneath the Hollywood Sign with Steve Cubine and Ann McNamara, the podcast that celebrates amazing stories of Tinseltown from its golden era. Join us next week for another episode and learn something else about Hollywood you probably never knew. Take a moment and give us a 5-star rating and a positive review, and tell your friends about us too. It'll help grow the podcast. Visit Steve's website at FromBeneathTheHollywoodSign.com. The executive producers are Steve Cubine and Nan McNamara. Executive producer and post-production supervisor Lindsay Schnebley. Associate producer and researcher John Price Ritchie. This podcast is part of the Airwave Media Podcast Network. Visit airwavemedia.com to listen and subscribe to their other fine shows like The Box of Oddities and The Shallow End with Schnebley and Toth. Copyright 2025. All rights reserved. That's a wrap.